My wife cheated on me with a manipulator from her job when I read their messages planning to convince me to open our marriage. I hired an actress to serve divorce papers and expose the guy. He lost everything and she was left alone. I'm 32 years old. I work in accounting for a mid-sized company, and 6 months ago I discovered that my wife was cheating on me with a guy from work who basically makes a living manipulating married women. What happened after that? I mean, the way I handled the whole thing still has me processing whether I did the right thing or if I went too far. But honestly, I don't regret any of it. I guess I should start from the beginning. When Sarah and I had been married for 6 years and I thought we had a solid relationship, one of those boring but stable ones, you know, where you know exactly what's going to happen every day, and that feels comforting instead of monotonous. Sarah and I met when she was like 24. I was 26, at one of those mutual friends' parties where nothing interesting usually happens, but that night something clicked. She was pretty, smart, had that laugh that made you feel like you were the funniest person in the world, and we got married 2 years later in a small but nice wedding in her parents' backyard. The first years were good, like really good, with those couple routines that sound boring when you describe them but are actually what makes a relationship work, you know what I mean? On Sundays, we made pancakes together. She made coffee exactly the way I liked it. I massaged her feet while we watched Netflix on Friday nights, those kinds of small things that build a shared life. We both worked full-time, me at my pretty predictable accounting office where every day was basically the same, and her at a digital marketing company where there was more movement, more young people, more of that chaotic energy that was never really my thing but that she seemed to enjoy. Everything started to change like a year and a half ago, but so gradually that I didn't notice until it was too late. Or maybe I didn't want to notice, because it's easier to ignore the signs, when acknowledging them means admitting something is wrong. Sarah started spending more time on her phone, like a lot more time, and when I'd ask her what she was doing, she'd say vague things like work stuff or chatting with the girls. And I accepted those answers because trusting your partner is what you're supposed to do, right? She also started dressing up more for work, wearing dresses she'd bought months ago but never wore, putting on more elaborate makeup. Those kinds of changes you could justify by telling yourself she just wants to feel good about herself, that it has nothing to do with you or anyone else. I believed it for months, literally months, because the alternative was too horrible to seriously consider. Around that time, Sarah made a new friend at work named Jessica, a recently divorced woman like 33 years old, who, according to Sarah, was rediscovering herself after years in a marriage that suffocated her. Sarah started spending more time with her, going out after work for wine or coffee, and when she'd come home, she'd tell me about the conversations they had, about how Jessica had opened her eyes to new ways of thinking about relationships, about the importance of maintaining your individuality within marriage, about how she shouldn't lose herself just because she was married. At the time, I thought it all sounded like that typical female empowerment rhetoric you see everywhere now, and I didn't give it much importance because, well, what's wrong with your wife wanting to develop as a person? Looking back, I should have paid more attention to the specific words Jessica was planting in her head. But you don't think your marriage is going to fall apart from casual conversations with a coworker. Then Sarah started mentioning a guy named Tyler, a coworker who apparently was super interesting and had very modern ideas about relationships. At first it was occasional, like Tyler said something funny today, or Tyler has an interesting point of view about monogamy, but after a few weeks, she practically couldn't have a conversation without mentioning something Tyler had said or done. Tyler believed monogamy was an obsolete social construct. Tyler thought couples should have more freedom to explore connections with other people. Tyler said true love shouldn't have restrictions or possessiveness, and every time I heard these things, I felt a discomfort growing in my stomach. But I also didn't want to be that controlling husband who gets jealous because his wife talks about a coworker. I asked her a couple times if this Tyler was flirting with her, and Sarah would laugh like it was the most ridiculous suggestion in the world. She'd tell me Tyler was happily married, that they were just friends who shared interesting ideas, that I was being insecure for no reason. The night everything changed was a Tuesday. I remember it perfectly because Tuesdays Sarah normally came home early, but that day she sent me a message saying she'd be working late. I got home from work around 6:30, made myself some dinner, watched some TV, and when it was like 10 at night and Sarah still hadn't arrived, I started to genuinely worry. I sent her a message asking if she was okay, and she responded with a simple, yes, leaving now. But there was something about the brevity of her response that put me on alert. When she finally got home past midnight, she smelled like alcohol and had that guilty smile people put on when they know they did something wrong, but don't want to admit it yet. She told me she'd gone out for drinks with the team after work and time had gotten away from her, and I nodded and told her it was no problem, even though my gut was screaming that something didn't add up. That night, after Sarah fell asleep, I did something I'd never done in 6 years of marriage, something that made me feel like a horrible person but turned out to be the decision that saved me from continuing to live in ignorance. I checked her phone. Sarah had always been careless with her cell phone, leaving it around without worrying because she'd never had reasons to hide anything, so her password was still the same as always. The date of our anniversary, pure irony, right? I unlocked it with my hands shaking, hoping to find nothing and be able to feel like a paranoid idiot who violated his wife's privacy for no reason. But what I found was worse than I'd imagined in my worst scenarios. There were messages, hundreds of messages between Sarah and Tyler, and they weren't messages from friends sharing philosophical ideas about relationships. They were explicitly romantic and sexual messages that made me feel physically sick as I read them. The messages went back like 3 months, starting innocently with conversations about work, but quickly escalating to flirting, then to declarations of attraction, then to plans to meet outside work, and finally to detailed descriptions of what they wanted to do to each other. Sarah was saying things to Tyler that she used to say to me, using the same pet names, and the worst part is that in the most recent messages they were discussing how to convince me to open our marriage so they could be together without having to hide. Tyler was giving her advice on how to bring up the topic, telling her to present it as a way to strengthen our relationship, to explore new dimensions of intimacy, basically manipulating her to manipulate me. I read everything, every damn message, sitting in the bathroom with the door closed so Sarah wouldn't hear me cry. And when I finished, I felt like someone had emptied me out from the inside and filled me back up with cement. I didn't sleep the rest of that night. I just lay there next to Sarah while she snored softly, completely oblivious to the fact that I'd just discovered her betrayal. And my mind kept going over all the recent conversations, reinterpreting them with this new information, seeing how every mention of Tyler, every modern idea about relationships, had been part of a plan to justify what was already happening. I felt stupid, humiliated, furious, betrayed, all those emotions mixing into a toxic cocktail that made me want to scream or break something or disappear. But mostly it just gave me a physical pain in my chest like someone was squeezing my heart with a fist. The next morning, I acted completely normal, made coffee, like always, gave Sarah a kiss on the cheek when she left for work, like always. But inside, I was planning what to do next. My first instinct was to confront her immediately, throw the phone in her face, and demand explanations. But something told me that wasn't going to satisfy me, that I needed a better plan, a way to not only end the relationship but to make sure she understood the consequences of what she'd done. I took the day off work, telling my boss I felt sick, which wasn't technically a lie because I felt physically and emotionally destroyed, and spent hours researching Tyler, looking him up on social media, discreetly asking a friend who knew someone who worked at the same company as Sarah. What I discovered about Tyler made me hate him even more than I already hated him. It turned out I wasn't the first husband who'd been a victim of his modern relationship philosophy. I talked to Rachel, a smart woman who worked in the same department as Sarah and Tyler, who told me Tyler had a well-established pattern of seducing married women at the office, convincing them their marriages were oppressive, getting them emotionally entangled with him, and then disappearing when things got too complicated or when he found his next target. Rachel herself had almost fallen for his game years ago before realizing what was happening, and since then she'd watched Tyler do the same thing with at least 3 different women, all married, all eventually devastated when he left them. The most disturbing thing is that Tyler was married too, with a wife who apparently had no idea about his activities at work, or maybe she knew and had decided to ignore it. Who knows? A week after my discovery, Sarah came home from work with a serious expression that I immediately recognized as the one she puts on when she's about to have an important conversation. She asked me to sit down on the couch because she needed to. Talk to me about something, and I knew exactly what was coming but acted like I had no idea. Sarah started with a long preamble about how she loved me, how our marriage was important to her, how she'd been thinking a lot about us lately, and then, with an almost comical seriousness considering how absurd her request was, she asked me if I'd be open to her exploring connections with other people while we maintained our marriage. She used all the words Tyler had probably told her to use, talking about personal growth, about strengthening our relationship through honesty, about how this didn't mean she loved me less, but that she wanted to explore different aspects of herself, basically the whole typical speech people use when they want to cheat, but make it sound philosophical and acceptable. I let her talk without interrupting, nodding occasionally as if I was seriously considering her words. And when she finished, I told her something that must have completely surprised her. I said yes, that if that's what she needed to be happy, then I was willing to try it. Sarah's face lit up in a way that broke my heart because it meant she really thought this was going to work, that she really believed I was either so naive or so desperate to keep our marriage that I'd accept being publicly humiliated while she slept with Tyler. She asked me if I was sure, and I told her yes, that I just needed a little time to get used to the idea, that she should start slowly and we'd see how it went. Sarah hugged me and told me this would make us stronger as a couple, that she was proud of me for being so open-minded, and the whole time I was thinking about how little she knew about what was about to happen to her. For the next 2 weeks, Sarah started, openly going out with Tyler, coming home late at night and telling me edited versions of their dates, as if sharing these details was part of our new, open and honest relationship dynamic. I kept acting understanding and supportive, asking her how it was going, telling her I was glad she was happy, and all the while I was executing my plan. I'd contacted a divorce lawyer and started preparing the papers. I'd moved money from our shared accounts to an account in my name only. I'd documented all the evidence of her infidelity, including screenshots of the messages, and I'd coordinated with Rachel to expose Tyler's pattern of behavior at work. I also did something else, something that was probably the most vindictive of all, but that I felt I needed to do for Sarah to understand how it felt. I hired an actress, a woman named Ashley, to pretend to be my date on a specific night. I explained the situation to her, paid her well for her time, and we scheduled everything for a Friday night when I knew Sarah was going to come home earlier than usual from one of her dates with Tyler. That night, when Sarah opened the door to our house around 9 o'clock, she found Ashley and me sitting on the couch, drinking wine and laughing, very close to each other, clearly in what looked like a romantic date. The expression on Sarah's face was exactly what I'd hoped to see. Surprise, confusion, pain, and then anger. That hypocritical anger of someone who's doing exactly the same thing but somehow thinks they have exclusive rights to do it. She asked me what was going on, and I told her, in the most casual voice I could muster, that I was doing exactly what she'd suggested, exploring connections with other people, that Ashley was someone I'd recently met, and we seemed to get along very well. Sarah started babbling something about how this wasn't what she'd imagined, how this was supposed to work, and I just shrugged and told her I thought this was what we both wanted, an open relationship, where we could both explore other options. The mask completely fell off her face in that moment, and she started yelling at me that I knew her situation with Tyler was different, that they had a real connection, that my thing with Ashley was just to hurt her. And that's when I dropped the bomb. I told her I'd known about Tyler for weeks, that I'd read all their messages, that I knew every detail of their affair, and that the thing with Ashley was just an act to show her how it felt to be betrayed. I handed her the divorce papers I'd been keeping in my briefcase, all already prepared and ready to sign, and told her she had 3 days to get out of the house that was technically only in my name because we'd bought it before getting married with money from my inheritance. Sarah stood there with the papers in her hand, her face smeared with running makeup because she'd started crying, and she was trying to say something coherent, but only broken sobs and half-formed apologies came out. She begged me to reconsider, that we could go to couples therapy, that it had been a mistake, that Tyler had manipulated her, all the typical excuses people give when they face the consequences of their actions. I told her no, that I'd had weeks to think about this and my decision was final, that she could stay at a hotel or with a friend, but that I needed her stuff out of my house as soon as possible. Ashley, the actress, had quietly left at some point during the confrontation, and when Sarah finally left that night with a small, hastily packed suitcase, I sat on the empty couch in our living room and didn't feel the relief or satisfaction I'd anticipated, just a deep tiredness and a sadness I hadn't expected. The part about exposing Tyler at work was surprisingly easy, thanks to Rachel from work and two other women who'd been previous victims of his manipulations and were willing to file formal complaints with human resources. Once they started investigating, they found a clear pattern of predatory behavior, violations of company policy on workplace relationships, and enough documented evidence to justify his firing. They fired him like 2 weeks after my confrontation with Sarah, and apparently when she went looking for him to console her after I kicked her out, Tyler basically left her on read and blocked her number because suddenly she'd become too complicated and he had enough problems of his own dealing with losing his job and potentially his own marriage. Sarah tried to come back to me exactly 3 times after that. The first time she showed up at my door 2 days after Tyler ghosted her, with flowers and a long letter apologizing and explaining how she'd been manipulated, how she never wanted to hurt me, how she was willing to do whatever it took to fix things. I didn't even open the door, just yelled through it for her to leave. The second time she sent me like 50 text messages in one night, alternating between desperate apologies and accusations that I'd been cruel and vindictive, that ruining Tyler's career had been going too far, that I was no better than her. I blocked her number after that. The third and last time she showed up at my office, crying in front of my secretary until my boss had to call security to escort her out of the building, and it was humiliating for both of us, but especially for her, and that was the last time she tried to contact me directly. The divorce was finalized 4 months after that night on the couch with Ashley the actress. Relatively quick, because there were no children involved, and I had more than enough evidence of adultery that made it so Sarah couldn't ask for almost anything in the division of assets. She kept her car, some money from our shared savings, and the furniture she'd brought when we moved in together, but the house, most of the retirement accounts, and everything else stayed with me. Her family tried to contact me a couple times, her mother specifically calling to tell me I was being too hard on her daughter, that everyone makes mistakes, that Sarah was really sorry and devastated. But I told them politely that my decision was final, and that I'd appreciate if they respected my space. What nobody expected, including me, is that Ashley the actress and I actually ended up being friends after all this. She contacted me like a month after the incident to see how I was doing, saying she'd been thinking about me and hoping I was okay, and we ended up getting coffee and talking about the whole situation. There's nothing romantic between us. To be clear, just a genuine friendship that arose from strange circumstances, and every now and then we go out to dinner or see a movie, and it's nice to have someone to talk to who completely understands what I went through without judging me for how I handled things. 6 months later, I'm in a decent place, I guess. There are bad days where I wonder if I went too far, if I should have tried couples therapy before going nuclear, if my revenge was more about my wounded ego than about real justice. But then I remember those messages between Sarah and Tyler. I remember how they planned together to manipulate me into accepting their affair. I remember the weeks of lies and betrayal. And I think I did exactly what I needed to do to maintain my dignity and make sure they understood that actions have consequences. I don't regret exposing Tyler. That guy was a predator who'd ruined multiple relationships and deserved to be stopped. I don't regret divorcing Sarah, because once that trust is broken, there's no real way to rebuild it, no matter how many therapy sessions you have. What I do regret, or at least what makes me uncomfortable when I think too much about it, is having done that little performance with Ashley the actress, that performative moment designed specifically to hurt Sarah the same way she'd hurt me. It was satisfying in the moment, seeing her face crumble, seeing her feel a fraction of the pain I'd felt, but in retrospect, it was unnecessarily cruel, like I could have given her the divorce papers without the dramatic show, and the result would have been the same. But that's how things are when you're operating from a place of pain and betrayal. You don't always make the most mature or measured decisions, and I have to live with that. Last week, I ran into Sarah at the supermarket, the first time I've seen her in person since the day she signed the divorce papers at the lawyer's office, without saying a word. She looked different, like thinner, with shorter hair, dark circles that makeup couldn't completely hide. Our eyes met for a second before she quickly looked away and walked off toward another aisle, and I stood there by my cart, wondering if she thinks about me as much as I still think about her, if she regrets what she did, if Tyler was worth losing 6 years of marriage over. I'll probably never know the answers to those questions, and it's probably better that way.